Post the video to educate. Do you even know the definition of Latino? What would we call ourselves as mostly brown people of this region we call America? What makes that better?
They have this fallacy and the mindset that it's a new world, and it's not. Obviously, just like fighting amongst each other to take away the lands. That's what they were doing for the indigenous people. It feels like the U.S. wouldn't ever want me to fully be part of it from the historical and current evidence.
Okay, so now we got a good overview of the terms and a little bit of my commentary for each, but I also wanted to talk more deeply and comprehensively about the indigenous versus the European aspects and the labels and identities of us Mexican descendants. I want to be more critical and go further on it. For example, my thing about the Mexicano and Chicano label in particular is that if we want to identify with the Mexicas or the Aztecs, okay. But my question is, what about those of us that have Mayan ancestry? Like, I was really thinking about it, and the Mayans and the Mexicas were different groups, if I understand it correctly, and sometimes they didn't get along. And my family is from Guanajuato, Mexico, so if I understand right, the primary presence there were the Chichimeca Hunas. So it's possible that my ancestors were the Chichimeca Hunas, but this group of indigenous people were neither Mayan or Aztec. My ancestors could also have been from the Otomi or the Purepecha group, but again, these groups were neither Mayan or Aztec. Or they could have been Aztecs because their presence was in what we now know of as the state of Guanajuato, even if they weren't the majority. And I'm not even sure if my great grandparents moved locations, so maybe what I'm looking into is inaccurate too. But if we can figure out which indigenous group we were from, I don't know if we want to be loyal to one group or the other, depending on which one we were part of. And maybe we should also consider how bad the disagreements were between the indigenous groups and what these disagreements were about to determine if we want to be loyal to one group or the other. Therefore, if some of us are not from the Mexicas or the Aztecs, or if we don't agree with them, maybe the Mexicano or Chicano label isn't the best. Another question is, who do we want to identify as and why? I think humans tend to not want to associate with an evil group, so if they have the option, they'd rather identify with the victims. And I think that's good to an extent because it shows that we don't want to be bad people. So what I see is that a lot of the time, Mexicanos, including myself to an extent, want to identify with the victims, so with the indigenous in this case. Even if we have European blood as mestizos, we want to emphasize the indigenous. And the ones in the US, the Mexicanos that are migrants, often do come from ranchos and families that are more brown, more indigenous. So in a way, it makes sense. But even us from El Rancho, we still have European blood. And to take it back to the comment that started this discussion, again, I want to call ourselves Latinos or Hispanics because we don't want to give the colonizers power by using the name that they gave us, and we do not want to identify with them because of their wrongdoings. But we are the descendants of the colonizers too, not just indigenous at this point. Because to be mestizos, we have to be mixed. European and indigenous. And if we want to only or primarily identify with the indigenous because we don't want to associate with a bad group, I think that's interesting because it's not like the indigenous were all good people either. A prime example is the story of Malinche, who was part of the Nahua tribe in a region east of the Aztec Empire, possibly Olutla or Painaya, and was sold into slavery as a child by her own family or community to the Mayas, and then given to Hernan Cortes. So yeah, of course, all of that is wrong. In this case, both the sellers and buyers of this girl were wrong, which included both indigenous groups and also the Spanish. And of course, she didn't have any loyalty to either indigenous groups, so her translating and helping the Spanish makes sense in that aspect. And I just point that out because I'm sure part of her identity was also fractured because of the things that she went through. She might be of Nahua origin as an Aztec, which she can't change, but she wasn't going to be loyal to them after they did what they did. It's similar to how we feel now. We rather identify with the indigenous rather than the European because we're not cool with all that colonization. But we're still both European and indigenous. We just might be a bit more biased or loyal to our indigenous side. But also, after learning about this stuff, I don't know if we want to be that loyal or take that much pride in our indigenous side either because they were really tripping with what they did to Malinche. Like, let's be real about that too. So slavery as well as other sins happen among indigenous groups, including big groups like the Aztec and the Maya, which I showed y'all an example of. And this happened because they're all people. And as always, the path to heaven is narrow because people often choose to sin and do wrong regardless of the group that they are part of. So the point is that the indigenous people weren't always very innocent. But regardless, the sins of the colonizers made a huge impact, and the effects continue today. So I understand why people that we now call Mexicanos rather choose to identify with the indigenous rather than the Spanish. And in particular, I get why we wouldn't want to use Latino or Hispanic as a label, because it directly comes from the sin of colonizing and all the tragedies that accompanied it, including the abuse of women and murder. And the colonizers gave those names to us for their messed up purposes. So again, I understand the dislike for the terms Hispanic and Latino. But as we move through the conversation, I still want y'all to keep in mind what I said about the indigenous people not always being very innocent. And likewise, some Europeans and their values, customs, and traditions weren't always evil. I want to emphasize this because I've been seeing Mexicanos go down a destructive path trying to remove ourselves from the Spanish. What I'm referring to is that I'm seeing many Mexicanos, including myself at one point, that would rather stop being Catholic because we have associated this part of the Mexican culture and tradition as bad. Oftentimes, we're falsely taught that Catholicism is inherently tied to the tragedies that the colonizers committed, and that the religion is nothing else but an accomplice to colonization, racism, and so on. But I will say that the things that are not very much taught or as widely known are the people like Bartolomé de las Casas, a Spanish Dominican friar and bishop who was one of the most prominent Catholic figures who vehemently opposed the brutal colonization of the Americas and the exploitation of indigenous people. And when I researched about him, it says that he was significant because he initially participated in the colonial system as a landholder and priest, but became a strong advocate for indigenous rights after witnessing the horrors inflicted upon them. It goes on to say that his works, such as A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies, exposed the atrocities committed by the Spanish conquistadors, leading to some reforms like the New Laws of 1542, which aimed to curtail the exploitative encomienda system. He actively engaged in debates with figures like Juan Ginés de Sepúlveda, who argued for the legitimacy of subjugating indigenous populations, according to Wikipedia. He also influenced the Spanish court to adopt more humane policies, though his efforts were often met with resistance from colonists. The advocacy and writings of Las Casas have resonated for centuries and are viewed as a precursor to modern human rights principles. While some of the clergy also voiced concerns about the treatment of indigenous peoples, Bartolomé de las Casas stands out for his tireless and sustained efforts to defend their rights and his direct challenge to the Spanish colonial system. So with that being said, of course he messed up by participating originally in the colonial system as a landholder, but I'm glad that he became an advocate in support of the indigenous people. And like it says, he wasn't the only one in the clergy that stood up, but of course they all should have been standing up as much as Bartolomé de las Casas if they were able to do so. And as it pertains to our identity, I wouldn't be mad identifying with those Spanish Catholics that were legit followers of God and not hypocrites. Regarding this topic too, there's also the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe, where the number of sacrifices dramatically decreased from thousands of human sacrifices per year under the Aztecs to zero after the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe and the mass conversion of roughly 8 to 9 million Aztecs to Christianity, and Catholicism in particular. The practice of human sacrifice was abolished as the people's hearts were converted to the true God, Jesus Christ. So again, it's not like our indigenous ancestors were always good if they committed these sins. Therefore, if we want to identify with them primarily because we see them as harmless, then these sacrifices are something to keep in mind and might convince us otherwise. Likewise, we should consider the good that the Catholic Church, including the Virgin Mary herself, contributed to society, which also improved the lives of indigenous human beings. But I'm not going to sit here and say that colonization or the colonizers were a good thing, because they were not. But God can bring out good from bad for sure. And this was one of the situations because we do need the truth. And the truth is that our Lord and Savior and the true God is Jesus Christ, and not the sun gods or any other type of god, including those our ancestors worship. And I'm not just talking about the gods of our indigenous ancestors, but it was obvious that our European ancestors worshipped and idolized power, money, and greed over Jesus, our Lord, which they were supposed to be following. Therefore, I'm okay with identifying with the Catholic aspect of the Spanish, because I know that God and the Catholic Church are legit. Plus, the true Catholics that were most aligned to Jesus Christ and his teachings would not have been okay with any evil that was happening from the colonizers. But again, I want to emphasize that it doesn't mean that the colonizers should be praised, because when Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared to Juan Diego, the colonizers didn't even believe that he saw her at first. That's why Juan Diego went back for the sign, which was the image of Our Lady on his tilma, because it was the way to show the colonizers what happened. So I'm assuming the Spanish colonizers didn't have enough faith in that instance that our God would allow Our Lady of Guadalupe to appear to Juan Diego. If not that, I could also assume that they thought so less of Juan Diego as an indigenous person that they couldn't believe that Our Lady would present herself to him because they saw him as less deserving of this apparition for being Indio. Or it could have been a mixture of the two, especially because many Spanish were not acting very Catholic or Christian when they treated the indigenous people wrongly. So their faith and walk with God is questionable, if I do say so myself. And for any of you that don't believe this story is true, just check out the scientific studies regarding the tilma in Mexico and how the tilma is miraculous and essentially not of this world. Like, it is literally a centuries old cactus fiber cloak bearing an unexplainable image of the Virgin Mary, so the durability is unusual, and where the image itself came from is unexplainable by science. So it takes more faith to believe that tilma is not actually from God than to believe that it is from God. And I'm gonna say it again, yo. Like, it literally takes more faith to believe that tilma is not from God than to believe that it is from God. I'm just saying. So yeah, there's things like that to consider. Personally, I'm proud to identify and embrace being Catholic, but the way I was even able to know about it as a cradle Mexican Catholic is unfortunately because of the colonizers. But I am proud of those that were legit Catholics and standing up for what's right. Plus, there's the fact that Jesus Christ, through the Catholic Church, is the way, the truth, and the life. And it's not Jesus' fault that people were misrepresenting him and the church. The real ones and Jesus himself will not be okay with the bad things that happen, which is why we call the Spanish colonizers hypocrites, because they weren't true Catholics. So what happened during colonization isn't going to change my mind about being a Mexican Catholic. And I'm going to be real, I did stray away and I was atheist at some point, in part because I didn't like what happened during colonization, but Jesus gave me clarity about how I should think about it, and now this is how I think about it. So, y'all gonna go to Misa this Sunday, right? Not for real though. I really do hope that every single one of y'all becomes a devout practicing Catholic with a great relationship with God and eventually a saint. And I want this for everyone, Mexican or not. But for us Mexicanos, don't be deceived because our fundamental roots and identity are from God before anything else. So back to the Hispanic and Latino labels and our identity as brown people. I've talked about this earlier, but identity is also about culture. And the culture I come from is as a mexicano with the tamales, taquitos, mariachi, corridos, botas de vaquera y sombrero, la fe en nuestro Jesús y veneración por nuestra Virgencita María, el respeto y humildad, el español en la lengua, la cultura del rancho y mucho más. Pero now we're also speaking Spanish and English, raised in the USA, the ambitions to go big, working from hours upon hours a week, the diversity we see from the people in the streets to the music we listen to, land of the free because of the brave, fireworks of the 4th of July, burgers and hot dogs, red, white, and blue. You know, we're just familiar with that type of stuff here in the US too. Anyways, and then I'm an individual too, so I have my differences as well. But when we talk about us as a group, our shared languages, races, cultures, locations, histories, experiences, and so on matter. Right now, the words that people use to describe people like me, with my languages, races, cultures, locations, histories, experiences, and that of my people, are the ones that I mentioned. Latina, Hispana, Mexicana, etc. But as we talked about, I understand that Latino and Hispanic aren't the best terms because they give power to the colonizers, and we could make new terms, but I'm honestly not even sure what we would want the labels to represent or who they would include or exclude. For example, Latino excludes those from Spain, and Hispanic excludes non-Spanish speaking individuals in Las Americas, like those from Brazil. And I think it's important to understand who it includes and excludes because policies and other decisions are being made with these definitions in mind. We also use these terms to be able to have conversations and understand things that apply to those that are defined by the term. Similarly, I don't know if we want to replace words like America or even Chicano and Mexicano, like what I talked about earlier, because of the things that we went over. So there's that. And another thing is that even with these terms and labels that we're currently using, I don't know how effective they really are. The Latino or Hispanic labels are pretty self-explanatory and they're broad enough for many of us to fit in. So checking the box isn't difficult. But sometimes I wonder if the broad definitions are useful when considering political and other important decisions. For example, in the US, Mexicans vote very differently from Cubans. So for things like the Latino vote, political candidates might be catering more to the wants and needs of one group within the Latino group versus another. And then there's nuances within the group of the group. For example, some Mexicans lean more towards the left and some towards the right. Although as a group, us Mexicans do lean more left, and that's in big part because of the immigration and race stuff. But honestly, I feel like if it wasn't for that, we would definitely be on the right because we're super family oriented, we're super hardworking, our values are traditionally Catholic and more conservative and stuff. But that's a conversation for another day. Anyways, I don't like that these terms Latino or Hispanic are too broad because I feel like political candidates barely really know us or understand us to begin with. And honestly, I don't know if I trust that they're going to try to understand the nuances of each group and use it to better things. Some might, but I doubt that the majority will. If anything, I can see many people in power learning these nuances just to make us fight against each other or something like that. And besides that, I still be confused with terms to describe our identity sometimes. Like I mentioned, the Latino and Hispanic labels are pretty self explanatory and they're broad enough for many of us to fit in, so checking the box isn't that difficult. Likewise, the Mexican term is similar. I can easily check the Mexican box because I know that I'm Mexican. But the race stuff is confusing in particular. For example, I know that I'm mestiza, and I have thought of just identifying as indigenous or India for race purposes at some point because I do have indigenous blood. Oh, and in fact, let me tell you about how true that statement is. Like, I really am. I really am. Like, el nopal en la frente, all that type of stuff, yo. Because when was it? I don't know when it was, but I went to Washington, D.C. at some point, somewhat recently. And I went to the Native American Museum. I don't really know what it's called for me, but I know it was about Native Americans, okay? And tell me why, when I went into that museum, I saw an indigenous person. Well, I saw many of them. But there was this one point in particular where I was looking at like an indigenous man, like his nose in particular, because I was like, he basically got my nose. Like, también como que anchita, afilada, all that type of stuff. So I was just standing there like, that's literally my uncle. Like, that's my Theo right there. Like, how could it not be my great uncle? We got the same nose. Like, what? But even then, I don't know how to feel about fully identifying as indigenous, to be honest, because the tourist in that museum was Native American himself from one of the tribes here in the US. And I asked him, like, hey, are Mexicans indigenous too? And he couldn't really give me an answer. So it just feels weird because, I mean, for him, it makes sense because he's actually formally part of a tribe. But for me, like, I'm not. So I also felt weird about it because I feel like that Spanish blood in me would make me appropriate this label in an unjust way if I claimed it, especially because I know Mexicanos haven't always treated indigenous people too well either. But to be fair, I don't know which Mexicans mistreated the indigenous exactly because my people come from El Rancho, so we're a bit more brown than those on Telemundo, if you know what I mean. But yeah, it is really confusing. Like, I was about to check indigenous in this one survey I was taking at one point in the US, but then it asked me for my tribe. So there you go. Like, again, it's like a way to say that you're not indigenous unless you're part of a tribe, right? So yeah, I was like, nah, let me not do that. But at the same time, I've heard people say that those in power, who are typically white, do not want us to identify as indigenous because if we did, we would unite against them. I mean, I have issues with that statement to an extent because we do have to remember that these are our brothers and sisters in Christ that we're talking about here. So let's just be careful about how we go about things. But I will say that whoever said that does have a point. There's definitely been historical and even current ways where those in power, who have often been rich white people, just pit less powerful people against each other, in part by separating us into these labels. And then when talking about our race as Mexicans, I also think about songs like Un Indio Quiere Llorar by Banda Machos. In English, it's titled An Indian Man Wants to Cry, Indian meaning indigenous and specifically from Mexico in this context. The song is about un hombre indio, probably from El Rancho, who fell in love with a woman from the city who is probably of lighter skin complexion. And it goes something like this. Un indio quiere llorar, pero si aguanta las ganas, se enamoró en la ciudad, se enamoró de una dama, de esas de la sociedad, que tiene hielo en el alma. Un indio ronda por ahí, por la mansión de esa ingrata, queriéndole platicar la pena que a él lo mata. Cuando la llega a encontrar, ella lo insulta y rechaza. And in English it says, an Indian man wants to cry, but he holds back his urge. He fell in love in the city. He fell in love with a lady, one of those from the high society, who has ice in her soul. An Indian prowls around that ungrateful woman's mansion, wanting to talk to her. The grief that kills him. When he finds her, she insults and rejects him. So yes, it's a statement about the woman, but also about those of her race and status who reject Indians just for being Indian and for being in the class status that they have been majorly subjugated to in Mexico. There's also the song Virgen India by Jorge Cafrune and Marito, and as you can tell from the title, Virgen India, or Indian Virgin, it's about our Virgencita Morena, Our Lady of Guadalupe, And it's songs like this that show that us Mexicans identify with Our Lady, because when she appeared to Juan Diego, she appeared to him as mestiza. And a connection with the indigenous was also shown by what she was wearing and how she was positioned when she appeared to Juan Diego. And on a personal note, my family sometimes calls me morena or negra. So there's that. And it's interesting. I don't mind being called morena, especially as someone who comes from family that grew up in El Rancho. But if I do that, then I'm also acknowledging the indigenous in me and that I am Indian, which I know that I am. But I'm still confused about how to answer the survey question in the US of whether I'm indigenous or not because of what I said earlier, not gonna lie. And also, if I choose the indigenous box on that survey, then I'm assuming that I would also have to choose the white box because of the Spanish blood in me, right? I feel weird about that though, because white people in the US have literally made it clear that I am not white. Like, I literally don't have the same privileges, you could say, as other white people. Or white people, I should say. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I don't even know what I am. Because technically, look, like, if you think about like a mixed person, like black and white, you know, that would be a mixed person, and they would say they're black and white. But for me, I'm Mexican, but that's not a race. That's a nationality, and to an extent, I guess, an ethnicity. I guess that's debatable. I don't know, because technically, Latino or Hispanic will be the ethnicity for sure that I know. Pero, like, what? Since I'm indigenous and white, mestiza, technically I'm also mixed. Technically, I am also white, like mixed, like black and white, like the mixed person that's black and white. I'm also white and indigenous, and maybe black, to be honest, because you know, Mexican. There's a lot of races that go into that. But anyways, besides that, you know what I'm saying? So I don't even know if I should say other white people or just white people, but also I know that regardless of the Spanish blood in me, I don't have the same status as someone of the Anglo-Saxon white race. Like, you know what I'm saying? This is so confusing, guys. I also feel weird about checking that white box because I've noticed that Mexicans that identify with their Spanish roots tend to not like their Mexican or indigenous roots. They also tend to be wealthier, whiter, and they tend to act more like white Europeans or their descendants in the US. So I just get a weird vibe from it. But I do want to reflect more on it because, like I keep saying, I am mestiza. So, in summary, I'm still super confused regarding the terms that we should use for our ethnicity and even for our race and nationality. There's so much more to say and so many more labels I didn't cover. For example, I could have covered the label for each indigenous tribe if we want to go back to identifying with our previous tribes or something like that. I also don't know where to draw the line sometimes. Like, I understand certain terms are problematic, and of course, certain words unrelated to this topic are obvious to me. But when it comes to this stuff about race, ethnicity, and nationality, I guess I haven't reflected enough and figured out what is out of line and what is tolerable or whatever the case. But if any of you have a clue or someone that studies this stuff, definitely leave a comment or reach out because I'm actually really curious and I'm still confused. I also definitely want to know what everyone has to say about all this and your opinions, so definitely share them in the comments. So yeah, but if y'all catch me saying Hispanic or Latino or something like that still, just know it's not my intention to harm or offend anybody. For example, when I'm using the terms Latinos or Hispanics, I'm genuinely just trying to refer to the mostly brown people of this region, which includes the people that we call Mexicanos now, and anybody else that the term typically encompasses. And I understand that good intentions aren't enough sometimes, but since I still don't know where to go from here, I'll just use them still. And I know I'm not the only one that's out here confused because I've had conversations like this with other people and we're still out here confused. Okay. But like I said, you know, if anyone wants to help or put me in the right direction, just let me know. But the truth that I want you to leave with is that at the root, we come from God. Remember I said don't forget about your roots? Well, this is literally the root of the roots. And that's the thing, yo. We're all children of God. And that's the one thing that I'm the most certain about. Like, each label created and put in us will tell us what we should think and how to act, what we're like and what we're not like, and so on. But the ultimate truth really just comes from God. And if cultures and groups ever transform, and if we ever figure out better terms for us, just know that what will always remain constant is that we're from God. He gave us the Catholic Church to know how to best act and think like, and to know what we actually are and what we are not, and so on. Entonces tenemos que ponernos las pilas, yo. Like, God is our Father. He gave us a Virgencita Maria to be our mother. We are all His children. And the home that He made for us is the Catholic Church. So I definitely wanted to add that bit about Catholicism in particular, even if it seemed a little bit off topic, because it's really not. Like, this stuff is really fundamental to our identity. Like, don't let other people's hypocritical actions dissuade you from the truth. Because if we don't have God, we don't have anything. And we don't know anything about ourselves, our true roots, or where we're going without Him. Anyways, y'all, that's it. This is the final episode, I guess, of the series. It wasn't even supposed to be one of those series, yo. It was just supposed to be like a video, a quick video, and that's it. Maybe not that quick, but it was still supposed to be just one. Like, this turned into a whole thing. All right, like, I hope there's like a good amount of y'all that actually like stuck through and like watched the whole thing, because it was a lot of work. Like, I'm new to this YouTube thing, so you know, I know I have some things that I could improve, but there was a lot that I had to say regardless, and I hope that you were able to take something from it. All right. But yeah, like I kept saying, like, there's a lot though that we could talk about. Like, there's so many different videos that I could make in the future and for y'all to watch. So that's a good thing for, I guess, all of us. Except people that be mad about what I be saying, I guess. But anyways, nah. But yeah, like I said though, like, that conclusion, yo, that's the ultimate truth. We're all children of God. I really hope that's the one thing that I really want y'all for us to take away. But like, hopefully y'all got more than that, you know, to take away. And if not, like, hopefully it's just like a little seed. Because that's what happened to me before. Like I said, I was an atheist at one point, and that's one thing that I want to talk about later on. But let me not yap even more though, because this is about to be turning into even a longer series or whatever. But all right, y'all. I hope that y'all have a good day and enjoyed this and took something out of this, like I said. And God bless y'all. Take care. I hope you got something out of that video. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. If you'd like to support my work, you can also head over to my Buy Me a Coffee page, which will be in the description below. And if you want more content, y'all can always follow me on Instagram or check out my other YouTube channel. Anyways, I hope that y'all have a good day, and God bless y'all.